Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Anna Kusmer. Who's your favorite Massachusetts legend? Ben Affleck? Jack Kerouac? What about Johnny Appleseed? Not only was Johnny Appleseed a real guy, he was really from here, born in 1774 in Leominster, Massachusetts. My guest today is writer Isaac Fitzgerald, who spent much of his childhood just a couple miles down the road in Athol, Massachusetts. Appleseed is famous for being a walker, traveling with the seasons from central Massachusetts to the frontier in Indiana and back again. For his new book, Isaac describes his year following Appleseed's footsteps across the same lands. Isaac went by foot, by boat, and by car, visiting friends and chatting up strangers in bars. His book about the experience is called American Rambler. Welcome to the Globe Studios, Isaac.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, Isaac, before I read your book, I don't even think I would have known that Johnny Appleseed was a real guy. And I definitely didn't know he was from Massachusetts, which is a really cool kind of realization. And all I knew about him is that he planted apple trees. But there's so much more about him. He was a religious zealot, for example. That's a fun detail.
100%.
So tell me some of the kind of basic facts about Johnny Appleseed. Like, what was his real name?
So his real name was John Chapman. And like you said, he was born in 1774. He was a real dude. His father was a Minuteman. So he was born right around the Revolutionary War. And he made his way in his late teens, early 20s into Western Pennsylvania, then eventually into what would become Ohio, and eventually made his way all the way into Indiana. And he was planting apple trees. That part's true.
And this is like back in the 1700s, like getting from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania to Ohio, he was walking.
It was walking, and it was seasonal. It was seasons. And then once he was in Ohio, which is where he spent most of his time, he did kind of almost do seasonal circles. So there's a lot of there's just like a lot of repetitive things. So like he would sometimes be in the same area every same time every year, and that's the Disneyfied version. He's throwing seeds willy-nilly. He's just planting them wherever. Right. And that's not what he was doing at all.
Okay.
It was actually kind of an interesting version of land speculation. So he would often partner with somebody else in the area. He would then plant an orchard. They would build a fence, protect it from animals, and then he would go off and be like, I'll be right back. And the person would usually be there caretaking it. Now, it's funny, and it's because of his religious beliefs, he did not really care about material wealth. He had this belief, one of the beliefs of Swedenborgianism, his religion, was the harder your life is in this world, the better it will be in the next. A very common belief in a lot of different religions, right? And so even though he amassed on paper what does look like a large accumulation of land, I believe he had like 12,000 acres by the time of his death, He amassed a large amount of land. It does not change the fact that he really rejected it. So he never really benefited from it financially. He never had any belongings. He never had an address. He never had a home. He lived a very simple, transient lifestyle. But the orchards that he made were real, and they were usually in set places. He was not just like frolicking to and fro, apple trees sprouting up wherever he wandered, the way that it's shown in the Disney cartoon.
Because he actually did have this these skills, tree nursery 100%. Skills. So as you say, he was aesthetic. He wasn't into material belongings. Everything I've read about him and from your book, he's like bedraggled, like his clothes are torn. He has this massive unkempt beard. He often has no shoes. I think in the book, you're kind of going for your own version of this. You sleep outside.
I do.
You frequently reference your outfit, which is running shorts, a Hawaiian t-shirt, and slides. Are these Adidas slides or are they off-brand?
Listen, they were off-brand slides. And that Hawaiian shirt got more and more ragged. That Hawaiian shirt got real beat up.
But it's you're like a modern version of him. What was the point for you of sort of dressing like that and presenting yourself that way?
So for me, I mean, one, it was purely comfort. And especially a lot of this walking and in the summertime as well, it would get really, really hot. Or sometimes when I was rafting down the Allegheny River, I wanted to be in clothes that I didn't care if I literally fell in the river. But it was also about, again, kind of trying to commit to his lifestyle, to the way that he did things. When I first set out on this journey, I promised myself that I would not sleep in a hotel. I promised myself that I either had to sleep outside or I had to sleep at a stranger's house or at a friend's house. And I wanted to not care as much as how I was looking for a little while. So the easiest way to do that, kind of like he would wear a similar outfit all the time. I was like, all right, I'll pick a uniform, which was the running shorts and the Hawaiian shirt, and different varying degrees of slides. Which again, looking back on it, I'll probably have back pain later in life because of all that. I could have picked a better shoe. I could have picked for all the steps that I took. But also it was just kind of about letting, my hair grew long, my beard grew long. Towards the end of the book, I run into a bunch of guys from Indiana and they just start calling me Jack Black because I was genuinely kind of starting to look like the guy. But I also kind of wanted to live in a way where I wasn't so concerned with how I presented and was more interested in people's reactions to me and seeking out whether there was going to be a tolerance or even an acceptance or even a hospitality, a welcoming. And that's what I found. I was surprised isn't the right word, but pleased. I was really pleased to find how much care I found out in the world.
I'm still trying to figure out what Johnny Appleseed is about, and in a good way. Like he loves nature and apples. I think the main word to describe him is a rambler. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about what he means to you and the rest of the people you met on your travels who seem to love him? Because you went to various Johnny Appleseed events, and he still looms really large. Why?
I mean, I believe he is our gentlest myth. So Paul Bunyan, not a real guy, mind you, but giant, was hacking down trees, right. The big blue ox, and guys taping sticks of butter to their shoes to grease up his pans, right? He represented how big America was.
And dominating.
Exactly. Pecos Bill was very much wild. He's riding tornadoes, also again, not a real guy. John Chapman, I think, keeps an audience, keeps a fandom, if you will, a historical fandom, because he was a real guy. So there is a real slice of history part of it. But two, I think he is our gentlest myth. I think he is our most caring myth. I think he is this country and its ideals at its best. And the fun thing about it, as you get into the real history of it, is even he doesn't live up to those ideals. Mm-hmm. At certain parts of his life, he is very peaceful. He does care about animals. He did have good relationships with Native Americans. At other points of his life, he was the Paul Revere of the War of 1812, which is something we don't remember at all. But at the time, that's what actually put him on the map. That's how he got famous during his lifetime. So I think the fact that you can kind of peel back these legends, you can peel back these larger than life stories to get at a real person and a real complex person is why he persists throughout time. But again, I also think it is something to do with he is us at our best, or what we most want to be, which is welcoming, which is caring for nature, which is being interested in conservation, which is being interested in fellowship with our fellow human beings and being faithful. But almost the best example I have of this is it has since died out, but I almost want it to come back. But there was a real push a few decades ago to replace the Boy Scouts with the Johnny Appleseed Scouts.
I love that.
And it would be it was like the Boy Scouts, but
so
way nicer. like not so much with the competition and the derbies and more
Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
I was a Girl Scout.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, more hey, let's learn
to sew.
Yeah, let's learn some home ec and how to be nice to one another.
How to be nice, yeah.
Which I really love.
More of my conversation with Isaac Fitzgerald after a short break. So, Isaac, I want to talk to you about your own history. Your first memoir is called Dirtbag, Massachusetts from 2022, I think.
That's right.
And it's partly about your upbringing in North Central Mass, I guess your kind of tween years and beyond. Who's the dirtbag? Are you the dirtbag? Are we all dirtbags? Talk to me about Dirtbag, Massachusetts.
Well, so something I think speaks not just to North Central Mass and not just to Athol, Massachusetts, but I would almost say is an overall Massachusetts aesthetic, and I would even maybe push it out all the way to New England, is we like that we're tough.
Yeah.
I think we're all dirtbags. There's a real pride in, especially if you're coming from a low-income background or a blue-collar background, there's a real pride in the scruffiness. There's a real pride in the toughness. I mean, Boston Strong is, of course, a great example of this as well. And so Dirtbag as a positive word was something that I really liked. And when I was growing up in that area with the highest teenage pregnancy rate per capita, I'll never forget this. And I pointed it out, I think just on Twitter or something way back in the day. But the Wikipedia page under like culture for the area, the last line was, because there's not a lot of areas for entertainment, they make their own fun. And then the next line was issues. And it went, like, basically, it was like rampant alcohol and drug use and and I remember I was like, these shouldn't. And somebody did go and edit it like within like the day, like clean that up very, very quickly. But so like, of course, there's a bleakness to that as well. But again, out of that bleakness, I do think comes this toughness. The other thing that I was really drawn to, which again feels very Massachusetts, very New England, but is also a lot of other places. In the book, I also moved to San Francisco at one part, which is a very small city, 7 miles by 7 miles. So you have these very rough neighborhoods next to these very posh neighborhoods. And right here in Massachusetts, the joke I make is, you have like the white linen, you have the really nice neighborhood or the really nice town, and the next town over is where all the maids would live. That's where all the help basically lived. And so I love that juxtaposition. I talk about it in the book. I did live in this very low-income area. That said, Massachusetts is still one of the richest states in the country.
Right.
So it's really interesting to be in this place where there's so much education, there's so many colleges, yet there's also these low-income pockets scattered throughout. And so I think, again, the same thing that drew me to Johnny Appleseed in a way is something that just is resonant throughout all my work, which is looking at the places where we have these juxtapositions, where something is both highbrow and lowbrow is something I'm always drawn to.
Yeah, one thought I had was the connection between the dirtbaggery, if
Please,
you will,
please, I love it.
and Johnny Appleseed. I think, part of your goal for this trip was to roll in unpretentiously and see how people treated you.
100%.
And that's part of the dirtbag thing, is sort of like just coming in, sort of without any airs.
Yeah, well, so I'm so glad you bring that up, and maybe this will push people to read to the end too. But in Dirtbag, one of the critiques I get on that book, and I was so happy with how it was received, and it was so well reviewed, and it took off way beyond my expectations. So I was very, very happy. But I would often see a reader every once in a while who would go, because basically I mention the tough stuff in my childhood throughout the book, but I don't explicitly explain it until the very last essay of that book. And I would see from time to time somebody go, I barely got through this thing because I thought this guy was such a jerk. And then that last essay, if only he had put that in the beginning, I would have had so much more sympathy for him throughout the book. And that's kind of the point. That's why I wanted to hide it at the end. I like the idea of us all having to think about and grapple with and wrestle with, that person that cut you off in traffic, or that person that's maybe being a jerk. What are they going through? Maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe something really tough has happened to them. And to try and build on that empathy of like, oh, if only I'd known this information at the beginning, I would have given this guy more of a benefit of the doubt.
I would have humanized him to begin with.
And I hide it at the end for that very reason, for the same reason you're talking about in American Rambler. I like showing up. I would never walk into a bar or a restaurant or a town while I was doing this and be like, "Hi, everyone. So I'm doing a project on America, and I'm a New York Times bestseller." Like that's because then you're skewing the whole situation. You're skewing the whole relation. Not saying it's always going to be positive either. Maybe I walk in like a nerd like that, somebody who's going to throw me on my ass. But yeah, I like the idea of just seeing how the world receives you.
Yeah. In Dirtbag, you talk about how much you love hanging out in bars and you love meeting people in bars. And I think this creates such an interesting sort of view or cross-section of America I personally don't know much about. What do you love about bars?
So they're public spaces. The original word for bar, right, is pub, coming over from England, and that just stood for public house. It was a house that was open to everyone, and I love the idea of that because it also reminds me of a church. A church is that same grounding, all are welcome here kind of situation. And one person read this book and they just called it a great American bar crawl. And
That's really
I
good.
just
You're like, why didn't
really,
I call it that?
I know, I just really, really love that because it is about this kind of like me moving from place to place and having conversations with people. And while it's not always in a bar, there are a lot of bars because if you roll into town, you're looking for a public space. You're looking for, they're called third
spaces.
Yeah, and we are having less and less of them now.
Right. As a sort of counterpoint, I mean, you could hang out in like bookstores or Starbucks,
yes.
but you go to bars. I mean, there is something, I think, you're almost searching for the type of people that wouldn't pick up your book or something. Not like they wouldn't pick up your book, but that aren't like running in your friend circles or something.
No, I really appreciate you saying that. That's been a drive of my art, and I've never spoken about this before, but that's been a drive of my art since I was very young. Since probably I would argue before I was actually making art and more when I was dreaming of this want to be a writer. You mentioned Kerouac earlier, very much a great son of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
When my dad saw Dirtbag, Massachusetts for the first time, one of his first reactions was, I shouldn't have given you so much Bukowski to read as a kid, which accurate sentence. Oh, I'm glad he did, but accurate sentence. And I do believe I was driven by the area that I grew up in, both in North Central Mass, but living here in Boston. I grew up in the Catholic Worker. I grew up in John Larry House, which is kind of a halfway house for the unhoused that was set up by the Catholic Worker. And I spent a lot of time in Haley House, which that whole neighborhood is now so much different than what it was in the 80s. But my parents, the Catholic Worker really helped my parents get back up on their feet when they were unhoused. And I loved that time. Like on paper, you'd think, oh, that must have been a tough time in your childhood. It was actually, no, there was so much community. There were so many wonderful people around. I was fascinated by all these different people in my life. And like, I wanted to make art that related to the America that I had experienced thus far. And I think that was a real drive for me. And yeah, oftentimes they are found in soup kitchens or in bars.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of your writing has to do with particularly male lostness and loneliness. I think Dirtbag as well as American Rambler. Men, I guess, often you, struggling to find your way in the world. I think about a man you meet in American Rambler, Dakota, who you meet in a bar in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He was a veteran, and he has lost friends to suicide. And I feel like you were really able to get him and connect with him. I think a lot of men don't really know how to be in the world right now. Can you talk a little bit about like this theme and how it sort of inspires your work and your own journey?
Somebody recently, they said Dirtbag, Massachusetts was a coming of age story. And American Rambler is a coming of middle age story. And I loved that, right? Isn't that such a great description?
That is good.
And I think as we come into middle age, it is so easy to lose track of your friends. It is, people start having kids. I'm now in my 40s, and when I wrote the book, I was in my late 30s. But that time area is when you can have friends at all different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
I still have friends who are working in bars, and I have friends who own homes and have started families. I have friends whose children are older now because they had their children when they were young. So when you get to this age, it's easy to get separated. It's easy to let relationships fall by the wayside. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's part of natural growth. But other times you need to understand that if you want these relationships, you need to be active and cultivate them and tend to them. And I think that is, when we talk about the male loneliness epidemic, we're talking, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think screens contribute. I think the fact that same way that you used to watch television and all of a sudden you could be like, oh, well, those are my friends right there on the screen. Or now it's podcasts and all these different ways that we can kind of fill up our time with entertainment more than actual real social community. Mm-hmm. For me, when I meet somebody like Dakota, it's important to me to spend time with this person, to really listen to this person. And you're often rewarded for it. The things he opened up about were really powerful and special. And then at the end of that, I believe it's our second night, he says, I just really like talking to you. I remember this moment so vividly because I could tell, one, he really meant it. And two, what he was really saying was, not a lot of people listen to me the way that you are listening to me. And it's about taking that time. That does not just happen casually. You need to put a little effort in. But when you start to maintain these relationships, the benefits for your own mental health and for other people's mental health can be really inspiring.
when you see people from your own hometown that grew up to be maybe closed-minded, or, kind of went in a really different trajectory than you, is there a part of you that thinks, there but for the grace? Like, if you weren't as book smart as you were, if you weren't able to get all those scholarships and go to get a great education, maybe you never would have been able to leave Massachusetts, or leave your hometown in your mind at least.
100%. And I want to be very clear. Where I'm from, there's also a ton of hippies and I mean, my best friend's mother spoke 5 different languages and was a part-time librarian.
Sure.
Who lived in a treehouse.
Not a dirtbag.
Genuine. I mean, no, she was a hell of a dirtbag, but like just an educated one. But overly. Anyways, long story short. But yes, and not just from when I was growing up. So many different times in my life, there is this temptation towards self-centeredness is the best way that I can put it. And this is something my father has said to me that I really, really love, because oftentimes you can be self-centered in an egotistical way. But there's also a type of self-centeredness that is driven from fear, almost a form of self-hatred that can make you closed off to the world. And my father has said, self-hatred is its own form of narcissism. And I think there is a real danger to how isolated people can become when they think that way. And I know throughout my life, not just in my childhood, but even later in life, there were forks in the road where I could have chosen isolation, where I could have chosen hatred, where I could have chosen closing myself off instead of opening myself up. And I just think, again, it's almost like a muscle that you need to keep exercising, because I think there is almost this slippery slope that you can slide down into not caring about the rest of the world, or even being actively disdainful and cynical towards it. And you don't want to, I get it. You don't need to be over the top, rose-colored glasses, blind to the issues of the world. But if you focus too much on the negative aspects, you can find yourself in a really, really bad place. And I think that goes not just for yourself, but again, that brings me back to our country. There's a lot wrong with this country, but there's a lot right with it too that is amazing. And that's something I got to see when I was out there looking at the country at an eye level. I mean, just think about the things that work. Don't get me wrong, a lot of things don't work, but think about how much works. It's amazing. Like when you really just stop to think about the ways in which so many different people from so many different backgrounds, from so many different areas around the world, like this is an experiment. It's an experiment that's going on for 250 years. And the fact that it hasn't already just like blown up is kind of incredible. And so it's about finding that balance. Of course, you can't just have that Disneyfied version of the country either, but you also want to make sure you're not getting into a headspace where all you see is the bleakness.
What did you learn about yourself writing this book?
So for me, when I wrote Dirtbag, Massachusetts, I sent it to both of my parents, and I said, we have a relationship outside of my art. I said, you do not need to read this, but I want you to have it. That said, I sent it to them after I could edit it, because it was important to me. What I say is the truth is a hunk of wood, right? But the sculpture I carve out of that hunk of wood and the sculpture my father carves out of that hunk of wood or my mother carves out of that hunk of wood all looks extremely different, right? For me, when I'm 8, when I'm 9, when I'm 10, let's say we had 4 bad years, that's almost half my life. For them, it's a rough patch, right? They have all these other experiences in their whole life. They're going to work, they're doing this. For a kid, if your house is violent or loud, that's it. That's your whole world.
Unstable.
Yeah, and it can really, really feel overpowering. So my mother read the book in a night, and she wrote me a letter, and she said, I'm so sorry, which I was not expecting. First thing, I'm so sorry. Second thing was, I had no idea you were carrying this. And that showed me how much I had hidden from her. But one of the other lines in that letter was, what about all the canoeing? What about the camping trips? And that's what American Rambler started off as, this way of honoring that 3-dimensional person. And so that's what I was putting in here. And that's why I was so drawn, I think, to Chapman and the Appleseed myth. It's like, oh, what are the legends that I tell myself? What are the stories that are actually more complicated than I put them down? At the end of this book, there's, just like with Dirtbag, there's a loss at the end of this book as well. Somebody described the book to me as a grief memoir in reverse, which I thought was such a great way of describing it. A grief memoir in reverse. And that, I think that was the other thing that I realized I didn't understand as I was doing this book, as I was doing that year, as I was really seeking out community and fellowship, and like I said, walking away from loneliness. But I realized I have a lot of mental health struggles that run through my family. And my way of keeping that at bay is learning how to be with people, learning how to ask people for help, learning how not to tell myself this lie that I think so many tell ourselves, that we have to do it all on our own. And I have a firsthand account of what can go massively wrong when you get stuck inside your own head like that. And that's the lesson that I need to take away from this, is to make sure that I do know how to care for myself, and I do take my mental health seriously. And I do understand that we are better as a community, as a people, as a country, when we're together than when we're apart.
I love that. One thing I really love about your voice in this book and in your other book is, man, you're just trying your best, and it's not always easy. I feel like you write that about that better than anyone else. And this is such a small moment, but one of my favorite parts of the book is when you're at a minor league baseball game in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and you're accidentally cheering for the wrong team. And everyone starts yelling at you. Yeah. You're like, man, I'm just trying here. Like, I thought that the red guys were the right.
Trust me, if you saw it, you would see how I was mistaken.
I mean, you're just trying your best, man.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that. And I feel like it's a relatable concept of, like, we're just trying to be a good person, trying to root for the right team, but it's not always obvious.
No, yeah, we so often fall short of our own ideals, and this, as this country does, as John Chapman did. Like, that's 100% one of the themes in my work. And the original ending of Dirtbag was going to be me forgiving my parents. It was going to be this nice, tidy bow. Luckily, I was in therapy, and I don't know how it came up, but I was telling my therapist that, and she said, Isaac, how can you forgive them? You can't even talk to them about it. And I realized that it was a fantasy. That was a fantasy that was happening. And I had to change the ending because of my therapist. I was like, what the heck? I pay you. Why are you causing me pains? But it's such a better ending the way it is. And it's just a small tweak. But it turned into an ending about trying, understanding that it wasn't something I'd done yet. I needed to try not just to forgive them, but to have those conversations, that there is a real beauty in the trying. And I think that is such an important part of life. And that's why it keeps coming up. I'm still trying, I'm still striving to be, I don't even want to say a better version of myself, but a more complex, full version of myself, and to understand all the parts of myself.
Isaac Fitzgerald is a writer. He's a hometown boy who's done good from Athol, Massachusetts. His new book is called American Rambler. In the show notes, we'll link to his recent essay for Globe Ideas called The Best Rest Stop in America is in Lancaster, Mass. Thank you so much for coming in, Isaac. It's great to meet you. Let's do it again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'll come back anytime.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Today's episode was produced by me. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave a review. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Anna Kusmer. Thanks for listening.